Hey there. Today I'd like to talk about the slow avalanche of human progress. It's an avalanche in the sense that it's changing everything, but it's also a slow one, or at least it's slow from the perspective of a human lifetime or a sort of worldview or way of looking at the world. It's both of those things. I am moving this week, so this is an unproduced video, and I apologize for that. But I'm actually kind of grateful for this format because I've been thinking about this for a while, but don't have it in really a solidified enough way to do a produced video, so it's nice to get this out here. A lot of what I'm talking about in this video is inspired by a guy on Twitter named Noah Smith. I'll put his handle here probably. You should follow him, he's great. And what he's been talking about a lot lately are countries that we don't see as developed that are actually a lot more economically developed and a lot more economically serious and impressive than we think. He's recently done articles on Mexico, Malaysia, and I think he's got one upcoming on Turkey. He also speaks a lot about development in Africa and how that's going a lot better than we generally assume it is. I think this work that Smith is doing dovetails nicely with something that I keep trying to emphasize in my work, is that we're in this very weird transitional period where I guess we've been for about 30 years where nothing really matters, sort of since the end of the Cold War. We can focus on ourselves and act as idiotically as we want to on the world stage and make international politics just another tool of sort of wrangling in our partisan politics, because we assume it doesn't really matter because the United States is so much more powerful than everybody else, and we can essentially do what we want. That has been true. That is true now, today, but it is changing much more quickly than we think it does. I think for a lot of people, not just, the average American, but I think for a lot of people in Washington, D.C., the way that they see the world is, okay, we've got the United States, and then we've got Europe, and oh yeah, we've also got Japan. These are the rich countries, and maybe there's some other people. I mean, China's making some great strides. We're certainly aware of that, but then there's this tremendous gulf, and everyone else in the world is just dirt poor, and that's all that we really have to think about. The only real actors in the world are the U.S., Europe, and China, and that's simply not true. That is changing. Not quickly, but massively. That's what I'm talking about with this sort of slow avalanche. It's going to change absolutely everything, but not quickly. It's going to change absolutely everything, but it's doing it so in a way that is slow enough that it's almost imperceptible. And we're just going to wake up one day, a couple decades from now, to find absolutely everything changed. By the way, this isn't a left-wing thing or a right-wing thing. It's across the spectrum in the United States. People just not really being aware of how much things are changing and have already changed. There's, of course, the sort of extreme right, horrific way of looking at the world. We're considering, essentially everybody to be from shithole countries where development's impossible, and these are backwards places that are awful, and the main thing we need to think about is not letting any people come here from those shithole countries. And then on the other side, there's the flip side. There's the sort of more progressive left-wing perspective, which is that, well, all these places are weak, and they're all victim countries of savage Western neoliberalism and this, that, and the other thing. Neither of those stereotypical views are true. Aspects of it are true. I mean, imperialism has been a thing, and it's true even from the right-wing perspective. There are a lot of these places that have been and continue to be very underdeveloped, but these are cliches that describe the world of 50 years ago, not the world of today. I think a lot of this misunderstanding comes from a lack of understanding of how development works, how economic development works, and how long it can take. We just sort of assume that things happened a lot more quickly than they did. And if you look at sort of the countries that we see as fully developed today, if you look at their histories, you realize that this took a lot longer than we might imagine. For example, the economic development to a sort of world dominance of the European countries took a lot longer than we are commonly taught. I mean, there were elements the sort of technological elements that helped the European countries to briefly sort of run the world were in place as early as the 1400s. The discovery of the United States, an edge in naval technology, printing, that sort of stuff. But it wasn't until 250 years later, really, until the 1800s, that these, did I do the math right there? Not exactly, but 250, 300, 400, even 400 years later, that all these tools were able to coalesce into a briefly sort of world-beating approach to society and technology. The Japanese are another great example of this misunderstanding. When we're taught Japanese history in the United States, we sort of go, oh, Meiji Restoration, and then the Russo-Japanese War, and then World War II and all that. But we're not really processing that's a century worth of process that's described there. Japan was forcibly opened up in the 1850s, and then, yes, half a century later, they were able to beat Russia, sort of the most claptrap of the Russian states, in a war. But that was 50 years, and in that intervening time, Japan had to put up with a whole bunch of sort of imperial impositions, like the ones that China had to put up to. You know, they were forced into unequal treaties. So even Japan, a country with a range of advantages that allowed them to sort of take advantage of Western technologies more quickly, even Japan took 50 years before it was able to sort of compete with other developed countries. And I would argue it even took until the post-World War II era for them to sort of reach and surpass Western levels of development. So this is something that took a century. So this is why I think the settled view of the post-imperial developing world is a little nuts. The idea seems to be that, these countries have been independent for 50 years now. Why didn't they instantly evolve into Switzerland? I think that sort of narrative has been set in ways that don't make a lot of sense. I mean, it took Japan 50 years to begin to compete on the international level. It only makes sense that it would take some of these other countries that were beaten down much more comprehensively longer, and it's also this attitude towards developing countries that, why can't they get it together, or they can't get it together, has masked the fact that tons of these countries have been getting it together. Mexico is now essentially a middle-class country. Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey. I mean, those are some of the sort of strongest outliers, the countries that are, essentially all the way there to being middle or even upper income countries. But there are examples across Latin America, Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia. They're across these massive regions where things are changing extraordinarily quickly and very much for the better. Massive economic development and massive catch-up is happening all over the world. This is especially true since the end of the Cold War and the end of the competition between U.S. and Soviet sort of quasi-empires that brought so much war and destruction to the developing world. Things are changing very, very quickly. I think we're somewhat shielded from this by the focus in the U.S. on the Middle East. We basically spend the most time looking at one of the most comprehensively destroyed regions, because of course the Middle East never got the end of the Cold War. They've still got regional powers competing over stuff, so the results in the Middle East remain sort of awful. So to my mind, this sort of slow avalanche of progress and economic development is absolutely a good thing, and it's an extraordinary thing for the world, and I'm definitely going to include this video in my Notes from the Golden Age series. But it does present a challenge for the United States. It presents incredible opportunities to the United States, but if we fail to recognize what is actually happening, then it will be a real challenge, because this is a challenge to a certain policy-making consensus we find in Washington, D.C., this idea that we can just sort of do what we want and push people around. It's been true for a very long time, but it's going to be getting less and less true as time wears on, and this is something that we absolutely have to wake up to in the United States. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and click the bell next to the subscribe button to get a notification whenever I upload a video. Thanks.